The night the rift cracked open above Kalmir district, Oren Vale was 10 years old and had nothing to his name except his sister. The surge came without warning, the way they always did in the outer districts, where monitoring arrays ran 2 cycles behind and the Hunter Corps evacuation routes were drawn by men who had never once slept in a place like Kalmir. One moment the sky above the orphanage was the usual bruised purple of a rift-adjacent city at dusk. The next, it was splitting. Mana shards rained like broken glass through the roof, blue-white and burning, and the children scattered in every direction, screaming, falling, slamming into doorframes and overturned cots. Oren didn't scatter. He found Lyra first. She was 7 years old and frozen in the center of the room, staring up at the hole in the ceiling with her mouth open and no sound coming out, because sometimes fear is too big for sound. He crossed the room in 3 steps, threw himself over her, and pulled her down against the floor with both arms locked around her head. The shard hit him across the upper back like a hammer made of cold fire. He didn't let go. Condition detected, total ablative intent. 0 self-preservation threshold reached. Initiating dormant class scan. He didn't see the message. He was busy keeping his sister's face pressed against his chest so she couldn't see the ceiling fall in. The Hunter Corps convoy arrived 11 minutes later. Marshal Davin Crest stepped out with a databoard and a face that had learned, over 20 years of triage, not to feel much about the outer districts. He walked the rubble line. He logged numbers. When he reached 2 children in the wreckage, a boy with a burned stripe across his back, a girl with dust in her hair and both arms around his waist, he read the mana surge data and made a decision. Non-recoverable, he said to the aide. Log them and move the convoy. He walked past without looking back. They survived, of course. They survived because Oren Vale did not know how not to. The Imperial Awakening census came to Comra's resettlement compound 8 months later, a formality for outer district children, since useful results almost never came from compound registrants. Oren sat in the scan chair while the examiner ran the mana affinity array. Lyra went first and came up empty. Class, none. The examiner wrote it without ceremony. Then Oren. The array hummed. The examiner frowned, recalibrated, ran it again. Class, none. Hollow, said one of the compound supervisors from the back of the room, not unkindly, just as a fact. Both of them. Don't hold your breath for a placement. They called him the Hollow Child after that. Not cruelly, or not always. Mostly the way people name a stray, you called it something because it kept showing up and you needed something to call it. Oren filed the name away and kept moving. He was 13 when he first petitioned the Outer District Hunter intake desk for a mission assignment. The clerk looked at his registry card, saw class, none, and shrugged. Support. Unclassified. Low clearance rift assist. You understand you're not insured above Class F exposure? Yes, Oren said. Sign here. He signed. The first mission was a Class E rift closure in a flooded warehouse district, 6 registered hunters and Oren, listed in the docket as support, unclassified, given a stabilizer rod and a position at the rear of the formation. The lead hunter, a broad-shouldered woman named Cave, told him to stay back unless called. He stayed back. And then one of the junior hunters, clipped by a rift beast's tail swipe, went down on one knee, exposed, and Oren was already moving before he understood why. He put himself between the hunter and the follow-up strike. The impact drove him sideways 3 steps. He stayed on his feet. Iron Vow, Aegis debt plus 47. Current total, 47. This time he saw the message. It floated at the corner of his vision in pale silver text, stayed for 3 seconds, faded. He looked at it for a moment, then looked back at the downed hunter, then at the rift beast regrouping for another pass. He raised the stabilizer rod and held his position. He didn't tell anyone about the message. This was not deception. He had learned early and well, that people in positions to classify things did not respond well to the unclassified presenting complications. He would figure out what the counter meant by continuing to do what he had always done. He continued. For 3 years, Oren took every low-clearance rift assist ticket the outer district desk would give him. He was never the strongest in any formation. He never carried the lead weapon. He positioned himself wherever the formation was most exposed, and when something hit someone he was standing with, he moved. Every time, the silver counter ticked upward. Iron vow, Aegis debt plus 83. Iron vow, Aegis debt plus 210. Iron vow, Aegis debt plus 441. He began to notice other things. The hits that landed on him landed softer than they should have, not painless, but softer than his classification should allow. The hunters closest to him in a formation took fewer strikes. Cave noticed and said nothing, because she was practical and the missions were clearing faster than usual. At 14, Lyra awoke. Not from the census had already written her off. She awoke quietly, alone, in the compound's small training yard at dawn, reaching for something in the dark and finding it. Her class registered on a walk-in scan at the district assessment office 2 days later, cartographer, Class C, spatial mapping affinity. Rare in the outer districts, common enough in the academy circuits to earn her a provisional scholarship invitation. She came to Oren with the letter. "I'll go if you want me to go," she said. "And I won't go if you don't want me to go." "Go," he said. He said it the way he held a formation line, without drama, without hesitation, like it was simply the obvious right thing and always had been. She went. She wrote. He read every letter and wrote back in his careful, economical handwriting, and the Aegis debt counter climbed. He was 16 when the message changed for the first time. Warden's mantle, active. Any individual designated under your ward cannot be struck by a ranked mana attack while you maintain standing position within 20 meters. He was in the middle of a Class D clearance when it appeared. He stood very still for a moment, processing it, while a rift shade circled the perimeter. Then he designated the 2 youngest hunters in the formation, both newly registered, both terrified, under the mantle, and held position at the center while the shade tested the edges of the formation 3 times and found nothing it could reach. The senior hunter of the group, afterward, told the mission docket that the formation had held better than expected. The docket noted, support, unclassified. Satisfactory. He was 17 when the outer district desk told him his mission clearance record had flagged him for the Sovereign Trial qualifier bracket. The Sovereign Trial was the kingdom's highest rank certification event, a live, broadcast event at the Imperial Hunter Coliseum where hunters competed for Sovereign class classification. The qualifier slots from the outer district were largely ceremonial. Nobody from a class, none registry had ever made the bracket, the clerk explained, because class, none registrants typically weren't still active at this stage. Oren said he understood and signed the forms. Aegis debt, 9,847. He looked at the number for a long moment. Then he packed a bag and took the transit line to the capital. Lyra was in the stands. She had come from the academy on a day pass the moment she saw his name in the qualifier roster, sitting in the upper tier with her cartography satchel across her knees and her hands folded. She had her brother's eyes, dark, quiet, not given to announcement. The Imperial Hunter Board occupied the central dais. 7 seats. Marshal Davencrest sat third from the left, older now, decorated, settled into the permanent expression of a man whose decisions had always been correct. The qualifier bracket opened. Oren cleared his first match without incident. His opponent, a Class B fire affinity hunter, threw 4 strikes that didn't land on the 2 junior bracket hunters Oren had quietly warded at the arena's edge, the only hunters besides himself in range, and then discovered, on the 5th strike, that his chainburst technique had somehow reversed polarity and extinguished itself. He looked at his hands in confusion. Oren had not moved from the center of the ring. Iron vow, Aegis debt plus 63. Current total, 9,910. The crowd wasn't sure what to make of it. The broadcast commentators described it as an unusual passive defensive display from the outer district entry. Then came the board motion. Oren had been expecting something like it. He hadn't known exactly when. Marshal Crest leaned forward in the third seat and addressed the board with the measured authority of a man who had spent 20 years being right. The outer district qualifier, registry designation, Vale, Oren, class, none, is competing without a classified combat ability on record. The Sovereign Trial Charter requires a registered class for Sovereign Class Assessment. This entry is ineligible. I move for immediate disqualification and removal from the bracket. The board deliberated for 90 seconds. A motion for removal was raised. 4 hands. In the stands, Lyra pressed her palms flat against her knees. On the arena floor, the number 1 ranked challenger entered the ring for the semifinals, a Class S combat sovereign named Aaron Dresch, the highest registered hunter in the kingdom, 6 years undefeated, his aura already crackling violet at his shoulders. He had been watching the crest motion with the polite impatience of a man who expected the administrative interruption to resolve itself quickly. Proceed, the board chair said to the arena floor, meaning, the crest motion is pending, but the bracket moves. Dresch raised 1 hand, and the crackling violet condensed to a point, and he crossed the ring in the time it takes to blink and drove a full-output sovereign strike directly at Oren's chest. The kind of strike that ended matches in half a second and sent Class B hunters off their feet and into the back wall. It hit. Iron Vow, Aegis debt plus 93. Current total, 10,000. Sovereign recall, initiating. The arena went very quiet. Oren did not fly backward. He did not stumble. He stood in the center of the ring, and for 1 suspended second the only sound was the hum of 10,000 accumulated points of absorbed impact, finding, at last, the exact shape they had always been meant to take. Then he moved. 1 motion. 1 counter. He didn't strike to injure. The class had never been designed for injury, only for the precise settlement of debt. He laid 1 hand briefly against Aaron Dresch's arm, and the stored force of 10,000 points of Iron Vow settled outward in a single, controlled, absolute release. Aaron Dresch, 6 years undefeated, Class S, the highest registered hunter in the kingdom, was deposited, carefully, flat on his back in the center of the ring. He was unharmed. He simply could not get up. His body had been, for a moment, more force than it could manage, and now it was resting. The arena was still silent. Then the system window opened, not just at the corner of Oren's vision, but broadcast-wide, flooding every screen in the Imperial Hunter Coliseum with pale silver text at 4 times the usual size, because the system, apparently, had decided this was worth the announcement. Aegis Sovereign, awakened. Classification, above shield/unranked. Iron Vow, settled. Debt balance, 0. Warden's Mantle, range expanded. 400 meters. First Warden, registered. Lineage restored. 400-year dormancy ended. Disqualification motion, nullified. Basis, classified ability confirmed, above assessment ceiling. The board chair read the nullification notice aloud in a voice that had gone very careful. Marshal Davencrest sat in the third seat and looked at the broadcast screen for a long moment. He looked at the silver text. He looked at the name Val, Oren, First Warden, appearing for the first time in the Imperial Registry since a man named the same thing had held a rift line alone for 11 hours, 400 years ago, so that a city could evacuate. Crest lowered his head. Not a formal bow, the specific movement of a man who had written in irrecoverable on a databoard 19 years ago, driven past, and understood, right now, with the broadcast running and every screen lit silver, what he had done. The board stood. Not on instruction. Just because sitting felt wrong. In the upper tier, Lyra Vale unclenched her hands. She had been holding them very tightly without realizing it. She looked at her brother standing in the center of the ring, plain gray mission jacket, dark hair, the same quiet posture he had held since he was 10 years old, and threw himself over her in a collapsing room, and she did not cry, because she was her brother's sister and they were not people who announced things. But she let out a long breath. The kind that carries a weight you've been holding for longer than you knew. Down on the arena floor, Aron Dresch finally sat up. He looked at his hands, then at Oren, then at the silver text still scrolling across every screen in the building. "I've competed for 6 years," he said, not bitterly, just with the honest bewilderment of someone recalibrating. "I've never been put down like that." "You weren't put down," Oren said. "The debt was settled. You're not hurt." Dresch considered this. "What happens now?" "I go get my sister," Oren said. "She came a long way to be here." He walked off the arena floor. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at Marshall Crest. The silver text continued to scroll behind him on every screen in the Coliseum: First Warden, First Warden, First Warden, and the crowd, which had been silent for the duration of the longest 20 seconds the sovereign trial had ever produced, began, slowly, to find its voice. Oren took the stairs to the upper tier 2 at a time. He found Lyra exactly where he had expected to find her, standing up now, satchel over one shoulder, waiting at the end of the row with the particular expression she wore when she was trying very hard not to make a scene. He stopped in front of her. She looked at him for a moment. Then she punched him lightly in the shoulder. "You could have told me," she said. "I wasn't sure it was going to work," he said, which was the truth. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she pulled him in by the front of his jacket and held on. He put his arms around her and held on back. On every screen in the Imperial Hunter Coliseum, the system window glowed silver and did not go out.